everybody. Welcome to the Informed Dissent podcast, Dispatches from the Gender Culture War. I am Lisa Sellen Davis, writer and journalist type. I'm here with researcher and freelance writer Eliza Mondegreen and journalist and author Ben Appel. I made that up for you, Ben, because I didn't get your 3-sentence bio, I don't think.
That works.
And we're going to start today by talking about the meeting we had with our founding members, founding subscribers, which was really great. And one of the things they suggested is that we create an intro where we explain who we are, in part to make this a little more user-friendly for people who are not in the fighting the gender culture war in the trenches with us. So we'll be preparing some kind of official intro.
Although we all found it a little difficult to find 3 words.
Yeah. We should probably ask ChatGPT to do our 4 to 5 word bios for us.
Well, for the three of us, we're working on books, right? That's something we can mention. So Lisa's been in this since, well, you first started writing, I think, and getting backlash in 2017, right? Would you say that was when your New York Times op-ed came out and when you started realizing that, oh, wow, this is such a hot button issue?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote my first thing in 2013 for Parenting magazine. It closed, so I think it was Parenting, not Parents. And there was no backlash. And then I revisited it in 2017 in the Times. And
right. And so since then, really, you've been locked into this a lot longer, but since then, especially, you've been really locked into this. So Lisa has done a lot of work. You write Broadview on Substack, and you have a book that's forthcoming about the kind of origins of, I guess, this culture war or pediatric gender medicine, would you say?
The medicine and the ideas about gender identity and trans kids and how they got institutionalized and censored.
Right. And Lisa, a big part of her story is Lisa has a gender nonconforming daughter. And so, that's a big part of it too. And then Eliza is a researcher, right? And
Yep.
What do you research?
I research online trans communities, and I also research kind of the belief system around gender affirming care from the perspective of providers.
And your book is about what?
And my book is about it's about gender as a siren song and why it is so appealing to patients and clinicians alike, and also why I mean, when I was having fun with ChatGPT, when I was kind of stuck with my book proposal, it turned out that ChatGPT combed all of the human knowledge that's been uploaded to the internet and decided that on balance, a siren song was a good thing, but I don't, just to be clear, think it's a bad thing. Yeah, so that happened.
Well, that's going to be a whole discussion about siren song. I love the way you put that.
Yeah, well, I asked ChatGPT to create like a local advertisement in this, to create a script in the style of a very local radio station for Gender as a Siren Song. And it was like, hey, kids, come on down to, blah, 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 local gender clinic, answer the siren's call. And it was like super upbeat and just completely, it was really wild. That's like 90% what I ChatGPT for.
If you think about Planned Parenthood's cute animation about if you feel uncomfortable in your body during puberty, you might be transgender and need puberty blockers. I mean, it's not exactly this is so great, come over here, but I think that mixed with the kind of proselytizing about gender euphoria, which I have never experienced any euphoria about my sense of self aligning with my body. Then again, I've never experienced any euphoria about my body in any way. So I do think it's fascinating how powerful the idea of gender identity is. And I'm exploring that.
Yeah.
Why did it beguile a generation, not just of young people, but of clinicians and of parents and educators. And so I need to interview. Eliza's in the book, but I actually should interview you more about that, because I bet your book will come out before mine. But that the power of gender identity is I mean, we're seeing it now, but we're also seeing people not letting it go. There's a dog in here. She has something to say. And Ben's book is coming out in the fall.
In the fall, yeah.
Cis White Gay, the making of a gender heretic.
That's right. Cis White Gay, the making of a gender heretic. October or November. And so, yeah, like Lisa, you were saying, we had our founding members chat. So just for everybody to know, we're going to be doing this again in the future. But for founding members, the five of us, our co-hosts, I'm sorry, Corey and Jamie are also out today. They're on an assignment. They have something going on out of town.
They're testifying in Montana.
There you go. And so we're going to be doing these things again, but what was really great about it was getting to know people. I love meeting people in this world, but we also got to get feedback from them about what could work better for what this, this kind of grassroots, ground up project that we have going on. And some of the feedback that we got was, one, introductions where people can kind of know who we are. Some listeners hopefully agree with this, but our founding members said that it was nice that we come from really different backgrounds. We kind of have different approaches to this, which means that we have, different varying perspectives, and it adds something to the show. And then also to not, the three of us or the five of us are really down the rabbit hole. And a lot of folks that are coming into this are at the 101 level. And sometimes people can get lost if we start throwing out names and mentioning ideas and theories that are at the 301 level or in the graduate or postdoctoral, level of this culture war. So it would be helpful for us to kind of pause and explain things a little bit more, to kind of break it down so that we don't lose people in that. But that was great, and I thought that was really valuable, and I think that I can certainly learn from that and do that, implement that.
Yeah, and another suggestion, which I think we'd been thinking about anyway, was doing a kind of standalone episode that maybe people could share with uninitiated friends and family. That would be kind of just an introduction to the issue. Why, basically liberal people have concerns, just something that would be very accessible. And I think that would be a great thing to do.
Yeah, I love that. So that'll be coming up. And today, I think today will be group therapy for me. It's going to be related to something that came up a little bit with our founding members, but also I've been getting a lot of emails from people saying, I'm having a harder time than ever talking to fellow liberals about this issue. And I really wish I had more to offer them. I also got a note this week, which I apologize to this person, I haven't responded to you yet, but how do you explain, how do you talk about gender nonconforming children outside of the explanation of trans? And how do you tell both kids and the adults around them, what we used to know, which is it is not predictive of any one outcome? How do you maintain the ambiguity that, for instance, the label tomboy used to confer? which, and there never was a male version of it. And sissy was an insult, whereas tomboy wasn't. And sissy was also, it was an acknowledgement that this was a kid who was probably going to be gay, whereas tomboy was anything from, I wear a ponytail and play soccer, to I am an extremely masculine female. And so I had kind of a hard week, which I guess I wasn't expecting. I feel like I haven't had a hard week in a while. And it started on Monday with, I had requested a meeting with school administrators, let's say, related to my kid's school, partly about what they had taught about gender identity in the health unit for seventh graders, which I shared on my Substack and which Ben had talked about, and which separated myths and facts about gender identity. But for me, were the opposite, that myth that people choose their gender identity, myth that it, is mutable, myth. And some of it was, I wanted to talk to them about what they were teaching. And they had said to the kids, it's okay if you disagree, just be respectful. However, they had presented things as facts. And, are you allowed to disagree that 2 + 2 is 4? I mean, maybe you are, but I don't think so. But the other thing was that I had all of these experiences. I'd been invited to speak by the PTA, and then a parent had complained, and I was deplatformed, and no one would engage with me or talk to me. That's not true. Eventually, they were willing to meet with me, but I just yelled at them. So I'm not saying that I am a well-behaved person, but I really demanded to know what the complaint was, because I was going to give my talk about the history of childhood gender stereotypes and not say a word about gender identity, and was very clear that I wasn't going to talk about that. But because I am morally impure, I am not allowed to talk. And then sometimes the parent coordinator sends out emails about parents' work. So for instance, they sent out an email to the whole school about a parent who had produced a Netflix show based on something written, I believe Ibram Kendi was one of the writers, and this. So that was acceptable to share. But when Ben and Corey and I spoke at the district meeting, they would not share it. And I know that the principal really believes in critical thinking and viewpoint diversity. So I understood that I'm lucky that that was the principal. And this is what I went in saying. I realized that I'm lucky to have this person as my principal. I realized that the parent coordinator has a non-binary child and very much accepts this idea of gender identity that I don't believe in. And I realized that the PTA and the district and the school are all different entities, but it is interfering with my parenting and my ability to be at the school. And I don't know how to navigate when you're teaching my kids the opposite of what I'm teaching them and then silencing me. And
let me pause you for a sec, Lisa. So just to clarify for listeners, your daughters attend school in Brooklyn or Manhattan, or?
Well, they attended New York City public school.
New York City public school. Okay.
Let's say that.
Let's say that. Got it.
That unusual in the city is both a middle school and a high school. And I don't think that there is actually a large population of trans kids at the school, which is unusual. And one kid, a friend's niece told me last year, not having any idea who I was or what I did, that she said, oh, I had a friend who went there, but who was non-binary and felt bullied, which is not good. And I said, what is non-binary? And she couldn't tell me. And then I said, what's the difference between non-binary and trans? And that was, it was very difficult, which I think is part of the problem, is we don't even know what any of these things mean. So this conversation proceeds. I had no water and was very nervous and cotton mouthed. And My husband came, which I'm really grateful for. The parent coordinator had to leave early, but the other guy stayed. And what I realized was that I'd been sending him a lot of things that I write, because I often write things for people in my own very deep blue bubble. And there aren't always a ton of things to send. But I was also kind of operating off, you send out some people's work and here's what I'm doing. And also I had sent, I'd been working for months and months on this viewpoint diversity guide about gender. So I sent that because no other guide like that exists. And during the conversation, I understood that they were taking this as, I'm asking you to promote my work. And when I ask for viewpoint diversity around this subject, I'm just asking you to promote my viewpoint, which is not, that isn't true. It's just that this is what I do. And these are the, I'd be happy to, if there was another viewpoint diversity guide about gender, I'd be happy to send that. So that was a big moment when I realized, like, you are thinking that this is about me and my ego and my work. And he kept saying, you're always talking about your work. And I was kind of like, oh yeah, but it's not.
Who said that?
The principal.
Okay.
Yeah, they thought I wanted like my work promoted, as if it was about the fact that it was my work, right?
Rather than that there are other ways to look at gender.
Yes.
Yeah.
So eventually we got to that, and I said, I don't need, if we do something about gender diversity or different ways to understand these topics, or you change what you're teaching to roll back like myth and fact, as opposed to here's how some people understand it, right? I can help you with that without my name ever on it, right? My name is Poison. And I get that. And it's very sad, but okay. This is not about, it's not about me, except for the fact that it creates this really weird situation in my family when you teach something as fact that I teach as myth to my children.
Yeah.
And then as we were wrapping up, and again, I'm so glad my husband was there, because when I say things like this, when I talk about the being silenced and censored and, deplatformed by the PTA and ignored by the district, and I think people think I'm exaggerating or presenting myself as a martyr. But the point is not about being martyred. The point is about not being able to explore these other ways of seeing gender identity. So he said, and I don't want to get him in any trouble, but he told me that there was direct pressure from the superintendent to make sure I am never allowed to address the school. And that I am known to the New York City Department of Education as someone who should never be platformed. And I believe he took, I spent that whole hour and a half talking about censorship, right? So it was
right.
On the one hand, ever pretending that wasn't an issue was odd, but it was shocking to me that he admitted it. I immediately filed a FOIL, which is the local version of FOIA, for correspondence related to with these two superintendents, one of whom I know socially.
The Freedom of Information. Yeah.
For emails related to me, to gender identity, etc., seeing if I could get some official information. The most shocking part of it is that I was told the superintendent made clear that his wife is an expert in gender dysphoric youth. And therefore it's very important that, the kids don't learn about detransition. It may prevent some parents from transitioning them. And so I looked up the wife, and the wife is chief behavioral health officer at Cal and Lord, which is a gender clinic that serves youth, which a friend of all of ours is currently suing. And this felt like, the superintendent may be silencing me to protect his wife's work.
Yeah.
And to think that children, 1 million children in New York City public schools will not be introduced to diverse views because the powers that be in the DOE are protecting themselves, not just their ideas, but their livings, that they would that they would prevent discourse and critical thinking. It felt, it knocked the wind out of me. And this is all happening in this context of people maybe who were growing more sympathetic, or between the time Trump was elected and the first executive order, were coming around on this issue and are now really back to, how can you support this? This is so cruel. And it feels extra hard to explain this moment to them. And yet at the same time, they're more committed than ever to preventing people like us from explaining it.
So you're saying, so here's Lisa, mother of kids, New York City schools, trying to teach more, get more of a diverse viewpoint on the concept of gender identity. And a big thing for you is kind of teaching it as fact, where it's like, this is a belief. Not everyone believes that everyone has this innate gender identity that needs to be excavated, that needs to be, through a proper name change and figuring out exactly what your gender is out of the million that are available to choose from, and what exact titration of testosterone or estrogen or what surgery is going to reveal this true self. I mean, that's where it goes to anyway. But you mentioned that a lot, and you when you were just talking, you mentioned something about how they platform other people, but they didn't want to platform or let anybody know about the talk that we gave. And you were referencing a talk that me, you, and Corey, who's our co-host, and the I think calls himself the disillusioned transsexual, or disenchanted transsexual. So, but we in January, Maud Marin invited us to speak at a committee education council meeting in New York, downtown New York.
Well, a subcommittee meeting, because we cannot actually speak at the main meeting, which is a meeting that trans activists and parents and show up at every month. Oh, here's Corey.
There you go.
They show up at every month and sing and dance the Macarena to protest. Hi, Corey.
Did you hear we were talking about you?
Wow, Corey's just Spidey sense.
So go ahead. Yeah.
Right, Corey, I was talking about my meeting, the revelation that the New York City Department of Education is directly trying to silence me, and we were talking about their refusal within my school to share the meeting that you and Ben and I talked at, and that we cannot talk at the regular meeting because that's a meeting, because Maud the committee passed a resolution to revisit the guidelines around sports that divide them based on identity versus sex, and to include female athletes, doctors, biologists, etc. Because of that, they show up every month to protest and sing, whatever. So Ben and Corey and I spoke at this academic affairs committee, which nobody, including my school, the DOE, the committee, no one would share any information that the meeting was happening. So it was very poorly attended.
And the people that did know were the trans activists who were trying to get it shut down, emailing the superintendent or the principal and saying, these are you're hosting transphobes and you need to shut this down. But so Lisa, you're saying that you have a meeting with the principal and you're talking about trying to get more diverse viewpoints on this topic in schools. And the principal tells you that the superintendent is purposefully censoring you and saying not to platform you because of your toxic views about viewpoint diversity and, wanting to protect kids from medical harm and also just not being taught something as fact when it's really a belief system. And he also says that his wife was especially pressuring him
I don't know if she's pressuring him, but that this is now second hand and now it's third hand, but that she was an expert in gender dysphoric youth.
Okay, so he brings the wife up though, right? He bring her up? Okay.
He brought her up to the principal who then passed it on to me.
I see. Okay, so he mentioned this. Okay, so what it sounded like to you was here's the superintendent and the superintendent's wife, who is a higher up at Callan Lord, which is a gender clinic where youth are transitioned. And it sounds like the superintendent is and the wife that he is kind of protecting her line of business by silencing dissenters like you who are trying to get the truth out about the reality of youth medicine and detransition and so on.
It's interpreted as there's a financial interest in silencing dissent. At any rate, there's a conflict of interest. And I think it was presented as, oh, well, we have this expertise and we know that this person shouldn't talk. But then if you think about it, well, what would my talking do? I mean, what they said was knowing about detransition could dissuade parents from transitioning their children or supporting their children's transition. Well, what would the problem be? You'd have fewer clients, I guess, at Callan Lord. And just trying to figure out what to do with that, and then I was at dinner last night with someone who said, why don't you think that that all of this banning, in other words, all of the executive orders are so harsh? Why did it go right to banning? Couldn't you involve? Why wouldn't you prefer if the NCAA made fair rules or et cetera? And I just said, but our side banned conversation, right? Like,
yeah.
What do you think all of the people that I interact with have been doing for the last 5 to 10 years? I mean, Denise from Fourth Wave Now sent detransitioners to meet with Democrats in 2016. I feel like I talked about that in an earlier show, right? I mean, that's almost 10 years ago. And they were hostile then, and Corey, have you tried to talk to Democrats?
Me, I try to talk to everybody.
It's your super. And what's that like? I mean, for the people who say to me, this is so extreme, this reaction, why didn't you try to work it out? Why can't we have a conversation? What conversations have you tried to have with the people who need to change?
Well, I can maybe give an anecdote or two. Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late. I was giving
Corey, Disenchanted.
testimony.
But what's your four-word bio?
Nina Paley's pet room. I was just giving testimony in Montana, but I also gave testimony 2 days ago in Indianapolis on a sports bill. In the gallery, I was seated next to a man who was going to give testimony on other bills, because there's other business before the committee. And as it turns out, he was a DSA member, very far left.
Oh,
And-
Democratic Socialists?
Correct. I don't know why they spell communist with an S, but whatever. He asked me what I was there to testify on, and I said, well, there's a hearing today on the women's sports bill. And he's like, those effers, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, that's interesting. Why do you feel that way? He's like, the Republicans are full of hate. I said, well, it might surprise you that I'm here to testify in favor of it, because I believe that these types of bills actually are important in order to protect the social standing of people who are trans. Because when men are participating in women's sports, that's a huge optics problem. And it puts in the public's imagination the issues of fairness and causes people to lose support for trans rights generally. So I think that there's an argument from the trans perspective to support these things. I didn't want to give him a whole... if I told him I was Nina Paley's pet troon, he would be like, oh, okay, yeah. Everybody hates her, and if you're a pet troon, that's the worst. I didn't want to give him all that background. But he's like, well, I get what you mean, but we can't support that because the Republicans use this as a campaign for hatred. And I said, well, if the Democrats would come to the table, it would take some of the energy out of the Republicans, right? It would add balance to this. So instead of it being the Republicans owning the issue, it would become a nonpartisan issue, and it would disempower the Republicans. Oh, but the Republicans are full of hate. We have to stop them no matter what. And I said, well, let me talk about a different issue, which I sincerely think that women who have to be housed with male prisoners actually is maybe the key issue here, or maybe not the key, the most pressing issue. And I said, does it matter whether it's politicized to protect women from being raped in women's prisons? How that's politicized? Isn't the safety of the women still important? And he's like, yeah, but I don't know. And it's all tribal. People who have no principles at least have a tribe. People who have not done the difficult work of examining why they believe something at least can be part of a tribe and echo the things that other people say. By the way, also on the gender critical side. Anywhere. It's not our tribe is the smart tribe and their tribe is the stupid tribe. All tribal behavior has stupidity baked in. It is the flour in the cake of the tribe.
Stupidity.
It sounds like what he wanted. Oh, sorry, Ben.
No, go ahead.
I was
I was
gonna
just
say, it
getting
sounds like he wanted-
clarification.
You said go ahead, Ben, and then you started talking.
No, I was just saying clarification that stupidity is the flour in the cake. Is that what you're saying? For tribalism. Is that what the metaphor was?
Yeah, I just made it up though, so
Okay.
now we can argue, is it the
Got it.
eggs, is it the salt, is it the sugar?
Go ahead, Eliza. I want to hear what you had to say.
Is it the mayonnaise? I don't know.
I was just gonna say, I've had a lot of those conversations where you can tell the person really wants to say, when you ask like, okay, does it matter if it's politicized, if it's still wrong to have men in women's prisons, or to like, to put kids on a permanent medical pathway that may not be the right place for them. You can tell that they really, 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 really want to say no, but they can't. And they have to say, well, it shouldn't, I guess it still matters even if it's politicized, but they really don't want to say that. And that is like, and it would be easier to have these conversations if our interlocutors could be honest about that.
If they could express some kind of ambivalence.
No, if they could be honest and say, yeah, actually, I do think that because it's politicized, we can't care about it. Or because Republicans have touched it first, or because Republicans have run on it, we can't do anything that might play into Republican hands by, changing prison policy in a way that's completely sane. It's been hard because, like Lisa, you were talking about the curriculum being taught to kids in New York City public schools and saying, like, you're allowed to disagree as long as you're not disrespectful, but then it's defining disagreement as disrespect when you say it's a fact and you're hurting your classmates' feelings, and maybe kids won't get life-saving medical care if we talk about detransition.
Yeah.
And there's just this assumption of like what Corey, it sounds like, encountered, like this DSA guy probably sized you up and thought, of course, you look like one of us, you're going to think the same way. There's just this assumption of agreement where if you're known to be a liberal, or if you kind of like look like, or you have a brief interaction and you appear to be like a sane and compassionate person, then there's no legitimate basis for disagreement on these issues.
I find the assumption of agreement is one of the things that I think is very difficult for me right now, because I talk to you all a lot, and I talk to my other rabbit hole people, but my day-to-day life, as a mother and 3-decade Brooklynite, formerly, like hanging out with whoever those kind of Brooklyn people were. There's a little wiggle room, I think, now, and people say to me privately, I'm more with you than about some things than I let on. But that assumption of agreement is difficult. And I don't need to be affirmed. I don't need to be acknowledged. But I haven't figured out, I think, in some ways, when to be quiet about it. So when I was at dinner last night and people are talking about stuff with the DOE, and I have this urge to say, like, I have a different perspective. But if people aren't, most of the time, people are not talking about these issues because they want to understand them better. And what often happens is I interject and say, Trump voters are very diverse, and a lot of people in my world voted for Trump. Now, I don't believe actually any of us did, because I think 2 of you didn't vote and 1 voted Libertarian. And I'll just be honest, I voted for Harris. Okay. I don't know what I could say. As I mentioned, my plan had been to write in Nick Gillespie, the Libertarian writer, and put the dead bear cub that RFK had put in his trunk for vice president. But in the end, I just did it.
You got 1 out of 2.
But anyway, I try to explain, and then I try to explain that even though all this crazy stuff is happening, I see very little remorse on the part of the people I know who went from liberal to Trump. They don't seem to feel they've made a mistake, and they don't seem that worried about the overreach, some of which I think is on a little bit on this issue, and then Elon Musk and Doge and etc. And then the people say to me, well, is it just retribution? Are they just getting revenge? So I try to explain what it is like to spend years and years trying to calmly interject different ideas and to raise awareness about the Democratic overreach, whether it was about this issue or about COVID, which now, in the 5th year anniversary, there are all these books coming out Like David Zweig has a book, people who were kind of cast out of the blue bubble for objecting in extremely reasonable ways on that, on DEI, on gender, whatever it is. What it is like to be one of those people and to have tried with all of your might to get liberals and Democrats to shift and do the right thing. Yeah. And they refuse to budge on any of it. And so this is what they voted for. It's not just revenge or retribution, but it is important to understand the psychology of the canceled, of people, what it is like to no longer be able to, walk the streets in the same way, because those are the people you have to win back. And if you're digging in on everything in the same way with the same hysteria, if you're arguing for the status quo instead of saying, yeah, there were some real problems with what USAID was supporting. I mean, burn it down? Probably not. There are a lot of people who are going to die. I mean, but reform it, remove the bloat? Yes, right? Whatever they're doing. But there was never a move to, and Harris very much ran on the status quo. So I find myself trying to explain this to people who I realize as I'm explaining it had asked a rhetorical question and didn't want to know the answer and are incredibly unsympathetic to what I tell them.
Yeah, and you said that somebody told you that people used to be killed for dissent, and so you had nothing to complain about.
Yeah, but by this time there had been a lot of wine drunk, but I was doing this thing, this very like impassioned, let me tell you what it's like. Like this thing I've been doing is hard. This has been hard on me. And again, I don't mean to be martyred, but in theory, this was a friend, I don't.
Yeah.
And she said, well, I've been reading, these historical accounts of people drawn and quartered, and you think about the witch trials or what, people literally burned. And my response was, well, we don't have those tools now. We're not, the superintendent is not going to stone me in the public square, but he is going to communicate to the rest of the Department of Education that I and my compatriots can never address our peers. So yeah, am I glad that I'm not being murdered? Yes. But that doesn't happen. Like we don't do that at the government. I mean, yes, we do. Corey says, yes, we assassinate people. So I guess I feel very stuck.
That escalated.
Say that again?
So that escalated.
Yeah, I mean, I again, it's hard to explain a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I mean, it's such a moral issue. It's such a black and white, people are profoundly uncomfortable with gray area stuff and with nuance. And now it's so easy to frame everything as a good versus bad. And also cruelty versus kindness, I was watching the live stream of the New Hampshire debate yesterday on House Bill 148, which we might talk more about next week because we want Jamie to be here and to discuss about the hostility in this movement and the hostility that she encounters. But, it began with the testimony of in House Bill 148 in New Hampshire was debated in the House, and it's about sex segregating, prisons, sports, bathrooms, etc. And it does not mandate this statewide. It just gives businesses, prisons, leagues or whatever schools the ability to segregate these spaces by sex with impunity. So they won't be, charged or sued for discrimination on the basis of gender identity. It just brings sex back into the picture. Um, so the first testimony began with a trans person, a trans identified male, a trans woman, a representative. And, what did he talk about? Suicide. How, recounts this tale of talking to a person whose trans identified daughter had committed suicide. And, this bill is about correcting the myriad problems that have come about from enshrining gender identity in law and policy and elevating it to the same standard or position or a definition as sex, which renders sex meaningless, Um, and so, he's choking back tears in his testimony, and it was moving, and it went on for a while. Well, after that, these folks, including Jonah Wheeler, who's a Democrat who has had the guts to speak out and vote against his party and break with his party on these issues, one last year in January of last year on a transgender surgery ban for minors, and then now on this in this capacity. And seems like a really kind and sensitive guy, and he has to get up there and say, okay, that's moving, and I moved, but here's, the others. And meanwhile, this person is sitting on a bench in the background, and then another trans or trans identified or non-binary, I don't know, their pronouns are they, L, so I don't know, you tell me, um, have their arms around her, comforting him on a bench in the background while Jonah's talking and saying these things. And then we have a Republican woman stand up and say, I'm moved by the speech, but right now in New Hampshire, if a man drops his pants in the gym locker room and exposes his genitalia to women and children have no recourse. There's nothing they can do so long as that man identifies as a female. That's a problem. Right now, the law is elevating trans people above women and girls. It's not, equal. And we need to get back to recognizing, equal rights for both sexes. Now, by this time, another person is up with their arms around the trans identified person in the background. And then they're standing up and doing a group hug, and then there's people in the gallery, the visitors, and they're yelling. And Democrats are walking out of the room, walking out
Yeah.
half of the chamber or however many.
Is there any other issue that we can think of in modern history that the Democrats have been so polarized? Did they do this
Within
with
their own
abortion?
party, or polarized from the Republican Party?
You're talking about Jonah Wheeler? No, I'm talking about just what other issues have Democrats across the country stood up and walked out of their sessions or like it's like a cult mentality. Is there any other issue that we can think of that compares? I can't think of any.
I mean, I don't know, maybe abortion, I don't know, healthcare. I mean, there's been demonstrations among, that have gotten news coverage. This has been heightened since Trump came along in 2016, obviously, because everything is for the cameras now and everything is for I guess that's what you get from having a former reality star as a president. Everybody else, it just kind of gets onto that wavelength. But, we've seen these demonstrations, but no, it hasn't been like to this extent.
And the idea, that
Yeah.
that experience of like we cannot tolerate even listening to this, right? That we cannot be in that's
Yeah.
the banning conversation.
Well,
Yeah,
and it was also, and it's just
that it's really like a sin or
sin. Exactly.
yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. That's what my point was about the morality of it, the cruelty versus the kindness. It's not about logic. It's not about common sense. It's not about nuance. It's not about uh, uh, debating things on a logical or reasonable basis. It's about dissecting the morality of the issue and who's good and who's bad. Well, who is going to be good in this situation where people are empathic and they're moved to make decisions based on who they feel bad for or compassionate towards and how they feel about an issue rather than what they're thinking about an issue? Are they going to agree with the cishet white Republican woman who's talking about a man dropping his pants in the locker room? And, and which in a normal world, it would be like, yeah, okay, that is crazy that someone could do that. Or are they going to, feel for the semi-passing, trans woman in the background who's being comforted by other House members as this person is speaking, and they've just shared about suicide and how their transition saved their own life. I mean, it's the, Lisa, you're talking about a lot about extracting the idea of belief from this. This is a belief system, and this is the result of that. It is a cult. It's cult mentality and it's cult-like thinking, but it is the infusion of religious belief, or at least something like it, into the state.
Yeah, I think a lot about, I can't remember where that woman was, but the one who said, who had kind of like the fit on the stand when testifying, or maybe it was when a bill was being heard and she was the trans people belong here. We love trans people for like minutes.
Yeah, it was a Kansas state senator.
Yeah,
I think she
that
was
really highlighted the religious mentality and the like, we just can't, the idea that this cannot be treated like another issue where there are multiple perspectives that have to be heard out and, maybe even reconciled, or the possibility they might be wrong. And I'm just thinking about my ex-friend who, and I mentioned this in my origin story episode, who said that she was going to donate $500 to a trans kid charity every time I talked to her about gender.
Mm.
And then it was like this form of, on the one hand, trying to get me to stop talking to her about gender, but on the other hand, it really was like this paying penance for having heard this like sinful or wrong think, or however you want to think about it. Like it was a way of showing penance for her having exposed herself to these unacceptable views.
Indulgences.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, Ben, when you talk about the woman who said, any man can expose himself, and the argument against that is, oh, well, you're saying trans women are predators. And then Corey, you were talking about, well, women in prison deserve protection, and the argument against that is, well, the trans women are also vulnerable. And
that's true. I think that's true.
It is true, especially, I think,
for the ones who've been medicalized.
Yes, I think, we were introduced to the idea of trans women in prison via Orange is the New Black, which has like passing feminine Laverne Cox who fits right in, maybe not that passing, not that feminine.
I wouldn't say passing, but sympathetic in the show.
Maybe HSTS, I don't know. But yeah, go
ahead. Okay, so now there's some gender jargon, but actually maybe we'll have time to get to that. But Aaron Reed, the quote unquote journalist, had I think it was today, a post about a bathroom bill, and that the way that he described it is cis people's like feelings in the bathroom matter more than trans people's, and that cis people deserve more protection, and that becomes the framing of who deserves more protection from whom. And we can't just say, well, we got to go with the bigger group, which is female, because that's half the population as opposed to 1% of the population, or maybe 5%. Anyway, but I think that part of the effect of social media, which elevated the minority voice kind of on par, helped us mainstream the minority. And also, I think liberals became very obsessed with protecting the minority groups. And then we stopped calling them minority, we called them marginalized. And that kind of hamstrings us, because we can't just say, look, there are more women, so yeah, they matter more, because how would any minority group accomplish anything if we were just right?
Although, could I just let you know, I heard a new euphemism for woman today in the committee
Oh, yeah?
hearing. Yeah, person born without a penis.
No. Really?
That's nice. Well, you heard Wisconsin had inseminated person.
Right.
Inseminated person. Wow.
And yeah, I was gonna, the Blockton Reported subreddit was having some fun with that and said, like, so then we have the cream pied person and the cream pie giver person.
Wow.
Which would be malicious compliance, I think.
Well, we could talk, we were gonna maybe talk about
Hope we clip that.
the White Lotus, but I was curious. I was just realizing that when we were talking about, when I was saying, look, you can no longer just stone people who say the wrong thing. But we can clip this if you want. But Corey, did you want to talk about, because you actually did experience not public stoning, but a different level of intimidation for speaking up. And I didn't know if you.
Yeah, I was assaulted.
Can you talk about that?
Let's do that some other time. I'm gonna file a police report. I wanna get that done before I record anything else about it.
Okay, because I just realized there.
I'll say something general.
Okay.
Well, I'll give you some background. I did mention I testified in Indiana. Afterwards, I was assaulted by some trans activists. The process of legislation is the democratic process. So when we're talking about citizenship, when we're talking about our fundamental rights, not the rights because we're women, or not the rights because we're Black, or not the rights because we're immigrants, all of this stuff that has been layered on centuries of theory about the relationship between the person and the state. Our fundamental right to participate in the decision-making of the state. When somebody like me comes to provide an opinion on what that decision should be, and then afterwards I'm assaulted and threatened with additional assault, that is a fundamental interference in my ability to have civic participation. And there are statutes against that. And it would sure be a lot easier for most people to understand that if this had been the 1960s or the early 1970s and there was a civil rights statute that a city was considering, and a minority came up to give support, and then afterwards that they were assaulted, that would be, they make movies about that sort of stuff. But that's what happened to me this week. And I'm sure probably 40 years ago, 50 years ago, when this was happening in the civil rights movement, there were probably, for every one case that we heard about, there were probably dozens that we didn't. I doubt that what happened to me is going to be notable for any reason. But I have to say, I'm sure it's not just in Indianapolis this week. I'm sure that this is happening to a lot of people who are giving their voices. My opponents have every right in the world to come and speak and give their opinions. I support that. I've said as much to people. I said, I'm glad you're here because this is the process. This is how we do things peacefully. But when you use violence and intimidation to stop people from coming and giving testimony, that you're worried about a fascist slippery slope? Is that what you're worried about, is fascism? When you come and you intimidate people who show up to participate in the process, make them scared, hope that they'll set an example for other people so that other people won't come and speak, when you try to chill speech, when you try to chill democratic participation because you don't like what's being discussed, because you don't trust the process and you'd rather go straight to violence, you are the villain of the story. You are the person who is the brown shirt. Okay, that's you. I think you should come and speak. I support that. When you come and you intimidate me and physically manhandle me, you're the villain. I hope that there are consequences for you.
Yeah.
Sorry. So that's what happened this week. All more details will be forthcoming.
I'm glad you're filing a police report.
Wasn't also Prisha prevented from speaking?
Yes, she had signed up to speak and she was not called.
She's the detransitioner, right?
Yeah, Prisha mostly. Yeah.
Who's a young detransition woman. And what happened there? Are they allowed to just not call on people, or?
It's unclear. So it could be malice, it could be error. I don't know that it's clear, but she had signed up to speak and she wasn't called on for remote testimony for Delaware.
And this testimony, what was the legislation?
The legislation was, if I recall correctly, I didn't testify, so I wasn't paying as much attention as I needed to. I think it's for puberty blockers. I don't know. Does anyone else know?
No, but we'll link to it.
No.
And
We'll link to it, yeah.
You have me thinking about, like, you know, if the left is kind of governed by emotions on this issue, or these issues. Because Corey, when you're talking, I'm thinking about, we've seen evidence of this for a long time, this mob mentality. And I'm not saying that we do not see this on the right. So everybody just stop for a second and just I'm talking about the left. I'm talking about Democrats. I'm talking about what's going on. But, when we saw in 2020 and we saw, like, the mayor of, I think it was the Minneapolis mayor, maybe, or George Floyd. But anyway, walking through a throng of thousands of people and they're screaming, shame, shame, shame at him because he would not commit then and there to defunding the police department in front of his constituents. And it was like a Game of Thrones episode, And that's insane. I'm sorry, that is insane. Now, maybe I'm especially sensitive to it because I grew up in a cult, but we're aware that this behavior is batshit crazy.
Mhm.
But what do? We say, well, but this is a sensitive issue. This is about racism. Racism is real. Racism is, so there's so much compensation that the left does for excusing behavior that is insane and violent and bordering on violence and cult-like and religious zealotry and so on. And we see it all the time. We've seen it with the trans movement. I mean, the people showing up to Maud Maron's school board meetings in New York and chanting and turning their backs and humming in unison. I mean, all over, right? So it's like governed by emotion, governed by empathy, this manipulation, this coercion of of you are a good person if you are on this side. But let's say, what does the right do? Because obviously there's mob mentality on the right, especially with MAGA. I see it. I see people excusing, behaviors. I see people. How do they reach people? What's their tactic? Because it's not, oh, this makes you a good person, or oh, this is the kind thing. What is it? Is
Merca.
it what?
Merca.
What's that? Oh, America.
Merca.
Yeah,
Mark,
you're saying like patriotism, like jingoism or patriotism
Yeah.
or
Yeah. That's
loyalty,
yeah, that's
right?
sure if you want to be articulate. Yeah.
Okay, America. Yeah.
Merca.
So is that what you think that's what really well, one, I do. I think that that's just like this, and not to really essentialize this and make it like a sex thing, but it's not a mistake that there's such a sex divide between women moving left and men moving right.
Mhm.
That's not a mistake. That tells us something, right?
Which women?
white
Uh,
women,
well, wait,
Oh,
white college educated women.
but just women in
okay.
general, right?
I agree.
Um,
I don't think you can generalize.
and I think that Lisa, like you said earlier, this idea of understanding the psychology of the canceled, or understanding
Mhm.
how it's felt for people, liberal people, to be gently talking back or thinking critically and kind of wanting to question things, and being completely shut down and called a Nazi and a transphobe and so on for years, a white supremacist, etc. Just horrible, horrible things. And um, so besides on the right being motivated by, okay, America and loyalty and patriotism and so on, and these kind of, but there's also resentment, and I understand it. I understand it more than I ever did. That
Yeah.
is it's strong. It's strong in me sometimes because I, you know, I have felt there is a catharsis in being able to um, call out the stupidity on the left or Democrats or I don't know. There's a catharsis to it. It's not healthy in a lot of ways, but it's understandable. And that's what the left and liberals and Democrats refuse to do. They call themselves the party of empathy, but they refuse to empathize with people that are on the opposite side from them because they see them as bad. And it's like, this is not just motivated by evilness, by hatred, by
Yeah.
discrimination. This is coming from somewhere else as well, or instead, it's complex, right?
Yeah, and I think that psychology of and this is what you're talking about too, but that psychology of the canceled applies to a lot of the people who've been driven to the right, I think, because when they express disagreement about, different priorities, different values, different ways to address problems that we face, they really were demonized the way that we have later been demonized for our dissent. And it is really terrible when you are not allowed to have your own reasons and your own values and your own priorities understood on their own terms, and that you get forced into oh, they're just a racist, oh, they're just misogynist, or they're just transphobic. Like, of course, there are people who maybe really, can fairly be described that way, but a lot of people who've been labeled that way, that's not remotely fair. They just saw things differently.
Yeah, there was a lot of concept creep around those terms, kind of just like transgender.
Yeah.
So just like transgender includes, anyone who veers away from GI Joe or Barbie. Transphobe is anyone who wants to speak nuance to power. And I kind of can't think of anything to do except keep doing it. And but I feel a little lost about like who I'm talking to now, maybe. And
Yeah.
one thing, I had a conversation with a trans woman this week who's very in this world, and who used to speak up and doesn't now. And we talked about how to communicate, like, what the ceasefire would look like if both sides had to give concessions.
In
So
Israel and Gaza, or in
No.
Ukraine and
I know,
Russia?
in the gender culture world,
Oh, I thought you were talking
Local
about
gender.
another literal
No.
issue.
virtual, no, figurative ceasefire.
Got it.
I've got nothing on the other issue.
Okay.
Um, and for instance, when the person at dinner last night was saying, don't you feel bad about these bans? And I just think like, we shouldn't have needed an executive order that reestablished the truth of sex, but we're going to have to keep that, that we should understand the binary nature of sex, and we should, kind of like that New Hampshire bill, sort of allow for people to make policy around that. Should there be a ban on trans people in the military? Probably not. We talked about that earlier on, but we have to define what is transgender, what is gender dysphoria. Are we talking about somebody who just wants to wear some lacy underwear while operating like a drone machine gun? Or, are we, it's getting loud in my friend's house, but we don't know what they mean by trans, because it means everything. So if you're going to ban, people who don't, if trans now means everyone who veers away from gender norms, then no, you cannot ban that. If you're saying, if you have a medical condition that requires you to dilate hours a day, maybe you can't, we have to define the terms. So that seems like something the right could concede or shift, right? And I think that's where we're a little bit lost, is we need to figure out what to ask from both sides. I'm still asking for the same things from my people because they didn't offer up anything this whole time, this whole like last 5 years that I've done nothing else. I don't recall a single concession, just censorship.
Well, it'll be good to hear from listeners, like in the comments, what their thoughts are about all this stuff.
Yeah, and I think next week when Jamie is back, and maybe when Corey filed your police report, we wanted to talk more about kind of the hostile climate that is being encountered in legislating for the bills. I'm sorry, testifying in support of bills or against bills. That's something that we really need to spend some more time on, and maybe in the meantime we can think about like, how do we talk to people right now, because the atmosphere has definitely gotten worse.
Anybody have some non-gender stuff that they want to share?
Well, you guys go.
Lisa, you have
I would have said the White Lotus, but
yeah,
we will link to that the White Lotus had, there's a interesting scene in the White Lotus that was
we didn't talk about that earlier?
No, we didn't talk about it, but that's okay. We'll link to it in the show notes. And maybe listeners can have a discussion. What have I done this week that is not about gender? It's weird. The things that I did that weren't about gender weren't that fun. Oh, I'm dog sitting, and I have been sleeping, snuggling a dog at night.
Good.
Because Eliza got the best cat, so that's dog snuggles are my recommendation.
I'm jealous of both of you.
That cat is so beautiful that even if I only had a stuffed animal that looked like it, I would feel proud.
Yeah. So this is my non-gender thing.
What's his name?
Now it's gender.
Sancho.
What is it?
He's named after Sancho, after Sancho Panza, because he's a very dutiful sidekick who will get up from a nap to follow me anywhere in the house, but he really just wants to like sleep in a nice bed and have nice warm food and not go on adventures because he's very lazy.
He's
Corey?
so
Non-gender? Anything?
I didn't have any non-gender stuff this week. It's been
Yeah.
a high gender burnout week.
Yeah, me too. Same here. Well, let's wrap up. Thank you guys.
Okay, well, maybe our listeners will, or watchers will recommend some non-gender things for us in the comments. And we are hearing your suggestions and working on them. So keep making suggestions and see you all next week.